We're running a little bit late, so we'd like to get started. I'm Jim Ware. My pleasure and honor is to moderate the next conversation. We just heard an awful lot about a couple of very intriguing technologies and how rapidly they're changing and how rapidly they're going to continue to change. But if you recall, at the end of that conversation, I think it was Arnold Levin who said, it's organizations that resist change, not even individuals. And I can vouch for that. I've worked as a consultant for over 30 years. I've never worked with an organization where everybody was resisting change. There are people actively looking for change. Our topic here is not just change per se, but organizational dynamics and some of the changes in organizational practices and in the way we work and the way we manage work that we all need to be aware of and face up to as well. We've got three really distinguished people on our panel this morning. They're pretty much new to these communities, so I'm going to just take a moment to introduce them to you. Sally Augustine on your far right. Augustine, I guess. Yeah, sorry. Sally is an environmental design psychologist. She's a graduate of Wellesley College, Northwestern MBA, and a PhD from Claremont Graduate School. She's a fellow of the American Psych Association. She's widely published, and she's particularly focused on the impact of space on behavior. So she straddles our world and the world of psychology. Secondly, Nancy Harris. Nancy is an HR professional. She worked for varied organizations like Sara Lee, Accenture, BP. Like Sally, she is based in Chicago. And like our third panelist, he's also a Midwesterner, as we heard earlier. Nancy is the co-founder of Disrupt HR Chicago, and she's the founder of Restart Consulting. She's also a guest lecturer at the USC Marshall School of Business. She has a BA and an MA from the University of Illinois. And Gus Gustafson, who I've learned in the short time we've gotten to know each other, is quite a skeptic and a cynic and a humorist. I think I'm going to set you up, Gus. He's the Chief Culture Officer for Carter, Inc., the Director of Executive Education at the Center for Values-Driven Leadership at Benedictine University. He's the former editor-in-chief of the Organizational Development Journal, and he's received the Global Strategic Leadership Award from the World HRD Conference in 2010, 2011, and 2012. So, Gus, we've got to know, what have you been doing the last couple of years? Anyway, I've asked the three of them to share some initial thoughts with us. I have spent over 30 years listening to predictions about how organizations are going to change and transform, and we're going to have new forms of organization. Charles Handy 20 years ago talked about the cloverleaf organization. There have been one new term after another. Today we're hearing additional new terms like holacracy, self-management, the gig economy, and yet it seems to be the same things I'm hearing today that I was hearing 30 years ago. So what I've asked each of the three panelists to start off with is just help us think about what's new in their world and what do they think we need to be paying attention to. Sally, we'll start with you.
First, I just wanted to take a moment to explain to you what the kinds of things I think about what I do. As an applied environmental psychologist, I think about how things in the physical world influence people's attitudes and behaviors. So we're the kind of scientists who think about things like ceiling heights, color of walls, what pattern there is on the rug, style of furniture, how the furniture is arranged, how that all works with personality and culture and things like that, and influences people's attitudes and behaviors. And I do have to make the initial observation that as a place to give a presentation, this space is a lot better than many that we encounter, except for that light up there, which is actually going to blind somebody by the end of the day. I can hardly read my notes after having looked into that light briefly. So if anybody up here seems to be unable to carry on and looking at their notes and doing funny things with their eyes, you know they're temporarily blinded. And to answer the question that I get asked most frequently, the question I get asked most frequently is what color people should paint their home office, and the answer is green, and we can get into the why later. But first, I wanted to make some observations related to disruption and organizational dynamics. I want to make the point that brains is brains is brains. Our brains today are the same as, and work in the same way that our forefathers' brains did, hundreds of generations ago, and are the same as the brains that our descendants will be working with, again, hundreds of generations from now. This is in terms of how we process information, our basic needs for things like privacy, control over our physical environment, and things like that. These are things that are going to be remaining the same no matter what happens to organizational dynamics or Bitcoin or that kind of thing. In terms of observations about things that I think are interesting that are going on in the world now that relate to change, first I wanted to start with something relatively more familiar. I wanted to mention the gig economy, or people working for short periods of time for company after company after company, maybe several companies at the same time, sort of generally in a consulting role. I think there are. I'm a psychologist. There are very clear implications for this in terms of people not bonding to organizations the way they used to. But if we get back into sort of place-related stuff, I think that when you think about the gig economy, you realize it could easily lead to homogenization of processes, which could lead to homogenization of environments. So it gives people a real opportunity to distinguish themselves if they provide either processes, places, et cetera, that are really particularly desirable for people who are living in this gig world to be. So I just wanted to talk about the gig world to start things off. Then I wanted to make an observation about the bifurcations we're starting to see in the workforce. It seems like at least once a week I see an article somewhere in the New York Times or something like that about how people who are high paid at organizations are getting paid even dramatically more money each year compared to the people who make less money at the same organizations. So we're starting to see that kind of split. And I'm also getting back to the workplace world. You're starting to see different concerns in the design of spaces for people who are at different places in what's known as the knowledge hierarchy. The knowledge hierarchy is, the $10 word in my talk. It comes out of a bunch of professors at my alma mater at Northwestern are using this. People who are high in the knowledge hierarchy really have a lot of knowledge embedded in their heads about how the organization that they're at works, how clients buy, how products work, et cetera. People lower on the knowledge hierarchy lack that knowledge and don't have that those sort of special areas of expertise that make them particularly valuable to one organization or another. And I see that spaces for people who have more of that special knowledge, being higher in the knowledge hierarchy, getting to be much more strategic in design, and the spaces for people who are lower on the knowledge hierarchy getting to be much more tactical in design. So by tactical in design, I mean helping people get a really, really straightforward job done. When I'm talking about being strategic in design, I'm talking about facilitating creative thinking. And so when you're creating spaces for people higher on the knowledge hierarchy, there's an interest in creating spaces that make it more likely that they'll think creatively. And in my world, there's actually a lot of research about the sorts of environments in which people are more likely to think creatively. Research relates to color, material selection, and things like that, and that's getting a lot more attention out there. But I want to take a moment to dwell on the lives of those people lower on the knowledge hierarchy, because things are not so good for them, and they will get worse. A lot of the spaces that have been created for these people who are relatively low on the knowledge hierarchy, they lack this special knowledge, are getting to be actually quite oppressive places for people to be. For example, there are spaces where people are on view to other humans continuously. This is very stressful for us as the kind of animal that we are. And just to give you an idea how bad things are getting out there. It turns out, and now the information I'm about to share at first was just known anecdotally, but now we're actually seeing it in the peer-reviewed press. A lot of people in those open workspaces are taking refuge in bathroom stalls. And at first, they were there so that they could just not be visible to others, because as human beings, we all need time during the day when we're not visible to others. And this change I'm talking about has nothing to do with people's digestive tract, et cetera. People, it would actually be sort of nice if that was the explanation, because that would be easier to deal with. But so, people don't want to be on display all the time. They need time, private time, in order to order their thoughts. When we don't have time, when we're out of the view and earshot of others to order our thoughts, our brains start to do something that's a lot like, remember, anybody here who actually remembers record players, remember when a record would skip, and you couldn't really get the song finished? Well, your brain starts to do that if you don't have some time away from out of view and out of earshot of others every so often. So people are, retreating to bathroom stalls first, so they had time alone, and then they learned that there were no distractions there, so they could actually work. So all over the world, you're finding people in bathroom stalls with laptops and things like that working away, and this leads to some, an interesting question. Do you want to, make the workplace outside that bathroom a better place to be? Or do you just make the stall a better place to work? So this is, yeah, really. Well, see, that's the problem, because often, like in some places, bathrooms are relatively more reinforced because they're seen as more like hurricane or, tornado shelters. So it can be hard sometimes to get Wi-Fi in there. So, you got these like people high on the knowledge hierarchy chain who you're trying to communicate to non-verbally all the time. We respect you, we value you, please don't go anywhere because we think you're so important, et cetera. And you've got the people at the other end who are like sheltering in the bathrooms. But, the third point I wanted to make comes out of a show that was actually just on last week on Charlie Rose has a series on PBS. Have you guys seen Charlie Rose's PBS presentation? Yeah. Well, Charlie was on vacation, but he had a really great guy whose name at this moment, of course, escapes me, who was filling in for him. And he had a conversation about artificial intelligence. And if you go to charlierose.com and click on the artificial intelligence talk to hear what I'm about to describe to you in its entirety. But it turns out, machines now can learn, and they can learn really, really well. And we're at a cusp, and in the near future, no exact date, but in the near future, lots of jobs will be eliminated. People who are mainly moving information around, they'll disappear. And a lot of them are going to disappear, which I don't mean to be really pessimistic, Arnold, but I think it's really going to upset people, because the estimates of Charlie Rose's experts were that between 10 and 40% of the white-collar jobs as we know them are going to disappear very soon. And these are people who generally have college degrees. The highest estimate, actually, which for those of us who have been annoyed by how much people on Wall Street make, we may take secret relish in what I'm about to say. Anyway, about 40% of the people who work on Wall Street could now easily be eliminated by learning machines. So, okay, so this is going to have really significant implications. Not only what are these 10 to 40% of the workforce who don't have jobs anymore going to be doing, that's probably they'll get into some sort of gig thing, and that will exacerbate any sort of issues or opportunities with that kind of system. But it's going to really change what the space for the remaining employees need. You know, the people who are doing the more rote thinking will have been eliminated by the machines. So you're going to need to have even more spaces that help people think more broadly and creatively. And I've just been using creativity as a sort of shorthand here for a general kind of thinking. But you know, in general, you're trying to get people to think more broadly so that they're not only more creative, but they're better at problem solving in general. They get along better with others. And when people think more broadly, even their immune systems function more effectively because there's less inflammation in their bodies. So, you know, designing for emotion has all sorts of repercussions, and we're going to need to continue to think about them very carefully in the future.
Thank you very much, Sally.
Thanks, Sally.
Thanks, Sally.
Nancy, what's new in the HR world that you live in?
Oh, what's new in the HR world? Lots. And I'm going to say, I'm going to sit down and talk because the height of the chair and the height of my skirt and the height of my heels are not making it for easy movement for me to go back and forth. So I'm going to stay
And this
put.
is more arduous than you might realize because that awful light is right in her
Yeah,
eyes.
so from a design perspective, these chairs are probably not the best for women in heels and skirts. But, so just to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the HR world, and I want to roll back for a little bit. And so I have been in HR for over 20 years. And I've seen a lot of things change, and I've seen a lot of things kind of, whether unfortunately or fortunately, kind of stay the same in our world. But my area of passion and focus has been on change management, whether that's from an individual perspective, working with leaders, or also from organizational change. And I am extremely passionate about the future of work, which I feel is now. I think Milos mentioned, he said, well, some of these things, you know, when you get the car, it's already 5 years behind in technology. So I kind of feel like even though we're talking about the future of work, to your point, Jim, a lot of these things have been things that we've been talking about for years and years and years, and that I've heard in the HR space as well. So one of the questions I wanted to ask people, have you heard the saying, ready or not, here I come? Who's heard that saying? Yeah, well, everybody in here has heard that. And that's how I think of change. It's like, ready or not, the change is coming, right? So why not be the person or the organization that's ahead of the change and leading the change, as opposed to the organization or the person that's either behind or resisting the change? Because either way, it's coming, right? We have seen it. You know, everybody uses the example of Blockbuster. We all know Blockbuster. We all know where it is. It's in the graveyard somewhere, right? Because it was overtaken by Netflix, right? The same thing is happening, or I feel is happening also in our HR function, right? So it's like, unless we start to change, and unless we start to lead, and unless we start to partner with people outside of our function, then we may potentially, I know this is controversial, be the way of, you know, the Blockbuster, right? So it's really, really, you know, important for me to make sure that as an HR function, we're aligned and connected with other functional areas to help drive the changes that are going on in the world of work. So I want to ask a question. There was a survey done by PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, and they asked about 10,000 folks, some folks in HR, some folks who are employees, CEOs, CIOs, all across the board globally. They asked them, you know, what are some of the top 5 changes that you think are going to disrupt the workplace? So what do you think the number one thing that came up?
Just call it out.
Just call it out. Yep. Okay, so I heard millennials. What's the other one?
Work from home.
Work from home. Okay. Technology. Shared workforce. Okay. Contingent workforce. Okay. Gig economy. There's one right answer. Ding, ding, ding. Technology. So 53%, so it kind of ties in, quite well with the panel, the previous panel, the technological changes. I mean, think about when you started working. So who's been working in the workplace for more than 10 years? Okay, so we got everybody. Everybody's covered in this room, right? Right. So I would say I've been working. Right, I've been working for 20 years. I mean, if I think about when I started working 20 years ago from a technology standpoint, I was sitting behind a desk. We didn't even have. I worked at Ford Motor Company was my first job out of graduate school, and they had their homegrown email, right? I can't even remember what it was called, but it was like so antiquated. It was like the next big step was we had like Microsoft Outlook. Like that was like the big thing where we could actually communicate. And then if you fast forward, what are we on now? I see iPads, I see our iPhones, I see, a whole host of things. With all those technological changes, we can work anywhere. Someone said that in the earlier panel. I don't have to be sitting in an office anymore. I can be working anywhere because the technology now enables me to do that. So that's a whole host of changes around where do you work? What do your workspaces look like? Do we need as much workspace that we have now? Will we need that in the future? And if we do, what do those spaces look like and how are they configured? I have to admit, I've probably been one of those people that's been in the bathroom sometimes because someone said, let's have open design workspace. And that's great for a little bit, but sometimes you need your quiet space, and sometimes I've gone to the bathroom to try to kind of clear my head to think it through, so to your point earlier. So that was one of the number one things was the technology and the changes and the pace of that, and that will just continue to change. It's not going away, so how do we as HR practitioners, as facility managers, as architects, how do we begin to design for those technological changes that are taking place? Another one that came up was the gig economy that Sally mentioned and Kate just mentioned earlier. And I'm going to throw the question out there. So there was a poll of, I don't know how many HR professionals were polled, but what percentage do you think they said by the year 2022, what percentage do you think will be contractors or temporary employees? 40%. Someone said 40, 60. Okay.
Anyone want to go higher?
120.
Higher?
Right. Well, now, mind you, this was just the HR folks. They said 20%, which I think is actually on the low end. I think it's going to be actually a lot higher than that. I can look at workplaces that I've been in, particularly in the IT space, where I would say probably half already were either employed by the company or they were contractors or people that we brought in for short-term assignments. So again, if I look at that change, what does that look like in terms of the workplaces that we're in and how they're designed going forward and how we build those collaboration tools and those collaboration workspaces for individuals who are not necessarily, quote unquote, a part of the company, but they're contractors or they're temporary workers. Last stat I have for you is about, someone had mentioned millennials, that came up as well. So millennials were polled and they were asked, if you think of regular office hours, 9 to 5, going to office, what percentage of you expect to be working in those kind of traditional, regular office environments, with traditional office environments? What percentage do you think? It's low. It's not that low, but okay. I heard something close over here. Somebody said 25%, so it was 29%. So it was approximately 29% of millennials are expecting to work in that kind of traditional workspace, traditional office hours. So again, as office, architects, space planners, real estate agents, again, what does that look like as you begin to shape and change and see what our workplaces look like in the future? underlining all of that, are the pieces around, the gig economy, technology. It's all around how we intend to work together, how we collaborate with each other, and how do we have, either technology or physical space environments to help support that. And then either the bigger question, if you're working in an organization, which I'm going to toss it over to Gus, is that you're working in those organizations, and how do you manage people? How do you lead, right? That's a big challenge for managers and leaders in organizations. If you're seeing someone through virtual reality and they're there and they're an avatar, right? How do you manage that? How do you know what they're doing or what their output is? And I think that's the question, kind of the TBD on all of this, but it makes it a really exciting and interesting and fascinating time to kind of be in our space.
Okay, thank you very much, Nancy. Gus.
I'm going to try to make it up to the podium. My heels
You've got
aren't
the
as tall as
pants,
yours.
right?
So what I love about a conference like this is it's a generative learning opportunity. And the word generative just means we get an opportunity to learn from one another. So while we were up here, I already texted my wife using my technology saying I'm moving my home office to our restroom upstairs. I've got the dust that goes up and down, and it seems like a win-win for me.
What did she say in the return message?
She just wrote back, do you know what Bitmojis are? Yeah. So she's got a Bitmoji that looks just like her, and I can't repeat up here what it was that she said in response to me. So I think
I'll see if I can see it on the screen.
There you go. I think it was something
I'll let you
about
know.
stay at the Nike place where you're at right now. When we first got this panel together, and I feel so blessed and humbled to be part of this and to be part of this couple of days with you. Jim set up a call for when I was in Ghana, West Africa. And I don't know that that was really intentional or not, but it made it so. I said, well, I think I can dial in. I got the 7-hour time difference figured out, and we ended up in the middle of a village in northern Ghana where they not only didn't have connectivity, but there was no running water or electricity. So I wasn't able to check in. And when we got together for our second call, they said, since this is the unconference, we have decided that there will be no PowerPoint presentations during our conference, which some of you will find that to be refreshing. For me, the 370 PowerPoint that I had already put together, 370 page, if anybody wants to stick around afterwards and go through that, I'm happy to do that. If you've got all the Nike gear that you can possibly use, we can hang out and we can look at that. But I look at the world through this notion of leadership, and how do we grow leadership capability and capacity? Because regardless of what industry we're in, regardless of what technology we're using, it comes back to this notion of how do we grow and develop and cultivate talent within the organization? How do we build leader capability and leadership capacity? And every study that I've seen done over the last 30, 40 years says that we're overmanaged and we're underled, right? So it gets back to what you said, Jim.
Absolutely.
And so we know that we have this huge need for leaders in the organization. And so leadership's been talked about as the most studied and least understood phenomenon on the planet. So there's all these different leadership theories. The great news is, as we've started to figure out, research has shown and practice has proven, there are some ways to grow and develop and cultivate leaders for this changing workforce, this changing workspace. Somebody mentioned something about change. I've heard that the only thing that doesn't change is change, that things change. And there was a book that was written a while ago that was talking about permanent whitewater. So in the old days with the blue hair, it's like you'd be coasting along, and then every once in a while you'd go through sort of the rapids, then you'd be coasting along, and then you go through the rapids. Now we're in this sense of permanent whitewater all the time, right? So how do we deal with that? Well, and how do we deal with that with the changing workforce? So when the question was asked, I heard millennials as the first response, and that's something that a lot of us that are not millennials are concerned about, as far as how do we create the conditions for them to be impactful. There's lots and lots and lots of stereotypes floating around about millennials. And for millennials coming into the workplace, how do they engage with the other generations that they're part of? So Gallup just came out with this brand new poll on what do millennials look like in the workplace and the workforce. Has anybody read it? Okay, so one person. So do you want to get up and share the 6 key findings? I will help you with it. It is absolutely an amazing study. There's about a 25-page executive summary that you can get, and then the 150-page report is $495. But again, when you're going through my presentation tonight, I've integrated a lot of that in. And you know, I've got a real good friend named Jim Clifton, who's the CEO of the Gallup Institute, and he said the question he gets asked more often than any other question is, are millennials really that different? And this is how he responds. The answer is yes, profoundly so. Millennials will change the world decisively more than any other generation. As this report shows, or the findings I'm going to share with you, millennials will continue to disrupt how the world communicates, how we read and write and relate. Millennials are disrupting retail, hospitality, real estate and housing, transportation, entertainment, and travel. They will soon radically change higher education. So I play as a practitioner in one side of my life and a scholar in the other side of my life, and it's being changed dramatically on both sides. Millennials are altering the very social fabric of America and the world. They're waiting longer to get married and have children, and they're less likely than other generations to identify with specific religions or political parties, defined by their lack of attachment to institutions and traditions. So lack of attachment to institutions has an impact for all of us. Millennials change jobs more often than other generations. More than half say they're currently looking for a new job. So they're the most disengaged part of our workforce right now. So when you look around at your millennials and see if more than half of them seem that they're disengaged, more than half of them are probably disengaged. So and that's a very scientific way to go about it. So Gallup recommended this notion of kind of the big six, and I'll go through those very quickly with you. And again, it's really hard for me to not write on something or have a flip chart. So you're going to have to pay attention or completely tune out. I'm okay either way. The first goes, past is working for a paycheck, and the future is working for my purpose. So my paycheck to my purpose. So my generation, my father's generation, it was all about getting a paycheck. You may or may not even enjoy the job. You may or may not find any kind of fulfillment. In fact, most of the fulfillment came outside when you're doing things in the community or you'd be involved in other things, but you didn't find it from work. Millennials are demanding that they're part of an organization that has a higher purpose. Now, who knows what the best-selling hardcover book of all times is? The Bible. Excellent. Who knows what the second best-selling nonfiction hardcover book of all times is?
How to Make Friends and Influence People?
It's not. Dale Carnegie. Good question, or good guess. No, it's not the dictionary either. It's actually A Purpose-Driven Life. So Purpose-Driven Life was written by a pastor for Christians, but if it's sold more than any other hardcover book in the history of time, it lets you know that it transcends people that are just Christians. It's this notion that we have this deep sense of longing and conviction for purpose in our life. So you look at the millennials, and they're wired like that out of the womb, and they want to be part of something bigger, something more impactful. When you look at the blue hairs like me, we're getting to the end of our career saying, well, we've been successful, but how do we move from success to significance? How do we find purpose and meaning and give back to the world? So the two are actually colliding. So the organizations that help people understand that they're part of something bigger than themselves are the organizations that are going to be extraordinarily successful. Now, how many people have heard of Medtronic, the company? Okay, most of you have. They make what?
Pacemakers.
Pacemakers, primary product that they make. So Bill George, I worked with him at Honeywell, and then he made the move over to be the CEO at Medtronic. And he walked in the very first day and found out that the rates of equipment failure or their defect rates was 20%. And it's like, well, 20% defect, not that bad, unless that happens to be your pacemaker in your heart or your uncles or your brothers or your cousins. So he walked around the very first day and he said, what business are we in? And the people said, this is a guy that came from Honeywell selling thermostats. And they're like, we make pacemakers. And he's like, no, what business are we in? And they're like, okay, this guy's not the brightest bulb on the tree. We make pacemakers. And he's like, no, what business are we in? And they started to think about it. And they said, we're in the life-saving business, right? So every joint that gets soldered and everything that we do has the ability to impact a human being's life and save their life. And so instantly he changed the paradigm that I no longer work for an organization that makes pacemakers. I work for an organization that's in the life-saving business, right? A little bit different shift. What do you think happened to the defect rates?
Went down.
Gone, absolutely non-existent. Every single person on the line, every single person engaged with the product just took it like, I'm going to do this one as if it's going in my mom or my Uncle Bob or my cousin Joe or what have you. And then at their stakeholder meetings, they had customers stand up and talk about, I wouldn't have been able to walk my daughter down the aisle if it wasn't for this notion. So purpose is extraordinarily important. The next one says they want to go from my satisfaction. So we always said we wanted to have satisfied employees to my development. Workers, millennials, and I would posit the other generations aren't there to get tchotchkes or to have ping pong tables or to play, with the entitlement gifts that we give them. In fact, it's been proven now for the millennials that that's actually a discourager and actually kind of talks down to them. They don't want stuff. Paycheck is not the most important thing. They actually want you to come alongside, care for them, lift them up, nurture them, develop them. So it also goes from a my boss mentality to a my coach mentality, where the old boss was the hierarchical, autocratic, you can do anything you want as long as it's this, and you can make it any color you want as long as it's black kind of deal. This new notion of coming alongside and being a mentor and being a coach and helping people grow and develop, that's how you get millennials to stay loyal to an organization. And they will stay extraordinarily loyal, and they will be the most actively engaged if you give them the conditions where they can grow and develop. So there's implications for us as managers and for us as leaders. Now, everybody's different, and everybody's motivated differently. So what's the best way to figure out how somebody's motivated? What gets them excited? Ask them, yeah. I mean, it's a simple thing. So we sit around as leaders and we go, and then actually listen. So we've got a one-pager that I can send anybody that's just clarifying expectations. And I sit down with every new member of my organization, and I sit down a couple times a year with it and say, okay, how do you like to be communicated with? What are the things that are most important to you? What are the barriers that I can remove? And if, if you ask them, they'll actually respond. And then if you do it, they actually get really excited. And you think about, so the golden rule is kind of the rule we always live by. Who knows what the golden rule is?
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So I love hugs, right? I'm a hugger. So if I came up and gave Sally a hug, Sally may not be a hugger. And I have imposed, and I got a sense of that when I first met her. So, it's like I didn't run up and dive tackle her in the hallway and give her a hug.
I would have decked him.
She would hit me. So the best thing to do is to ask our employees and say, what are the things that make you tick? What are the things that actually get you excited? We always think compensation is important, and on any HR survey I've ever seen, it's 6th, 7th, and it's dropping down pretty significant. And then this notion of my annual review to my ongoing conversations. Millennials get all of their information from the internet and from social media. They don't watch TV to get it. They've never picked up magazines. 3% of them read the newspaper. So this notion of, I'm going to spend a whole year evaluating you, and then I'm going to wait for one magical day and bring you in and tell you, back in February of 2014, you did something that really pissed me off as your leader, and hold them, punitively accountable, versus this notion of every single day being engaged with them, talking to them, caring for them, lifting them up, walking alongside them. And again, this doesn't just apply to millennials. Big change, 5th biggest change is to shift from my weaknesses to my strengths. The research has shown unequivocally that if you focus on your weakness, it will never become a strength. In fact, like if I suck at organization and planning, and I go take a whole bunch of classes on organization planning, I might move to I suck from I'm mediocre at it, versus if you focus on your strengths, you've got infinite growth capabilities. So organizations can't be naive to what the weaknesses are, but you've got to create the conditions where you surround people that have complementary strengths and complementary gifts. And finally, the notion of it shifts from my job to my life. So again, we jump back to the beginning and say that millennials are really, really interested in what they do that has meaning, and they see more of a blend between what it is they do professionally and what it is they do vocationally. It's no longer just a job where you check the box or you go to work or what have you. They'll continue to look for a place where they feel like they can find meaning, that it really is, it's a life, not a job. So those are kind of the top 6, my paycheck to my purpose. My satisfaction to my boss to my
Coach.
my annual review to
Conversation.
ongoing conversations, my weaknesses to my,
Strength.
and my job to my life. So this is a great opportunity for all of us to be thinking in terms of, leadership is when we have the care of another human being entrusted to us. It's something that I take extraordinarily seriously, whether you're a parent, whether you're a coworker, whether it's your customers, whether whoever it is, we can become better leaders. And we've got competency models and all sorts of research that shows you what the best practices look like, practice-proven results. So again, my PowerPoint just went up to, I think, 572 pages for anybody that wants that. I'd like to leave you with, I got a bunch of favorite leadership quotes, but I'd like to leave you with this one from Margaret Mead. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So as this group of unique people that have come together for such a time as this, and to spend the next couple of days talking about the things that are significant and impactful in our industry, and that bleeds over to the world, I think you've got a great opportunity to make a significant difference in the world. So thanks for letting me be here. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Gus.
You bet.
We've got 6 or 7 minutes left. Let me just ask first, Sally and Nancy, if you have any quick comments or reactions now that you've heard all 3 of yourselves. Anything you want to add or ask Gus, or Gus, you want to ask them? Just very quickly, but then we want to bring the rest of the group in.
I think in the end, it always gets down to demonstrating respect for other individuals, treating them, with respect and consideration, and that leads to sort of performance that
Sort
we're
of
all
no matter what the conditions, no matter what technology we're dealing with, no matter what issues in the world, you're saying it starts...
People can achieve in
Yes,
amazing
right.
situations.
Nancy, any?
I would echo what Gus said. Is I think this is a really exciting time, and sometimes we look for, it's the other person or that other group that's going to lead the change. And I think now is the time to say, hey, you know what, we have the power to lead the change, and let's do it.
Right. Okay,
Or
any
just
questions?
do it, like Nike. I
Right.
said, let's do
very
it.
good,
Just
very
do
good.
it, like
do
the
it.
old
Good
Nike.
time.
Just go to the company store. There you go.
Okay, questions, comments, observations from the audience?
Yes, so first I just wanted to thank Nancy for using the terms that this was an interesting and fascinating time, because it can be very scary and change is sometimes viewed as very negative. So that kind of puts it in a more a sunshine light instead of something doom and gloom. And then I was also just very curious, Gus, about that Gallup poll. I have to put on my parent hat because I'm a parent of, I guess it would be Generation Z.
Yeah, they still haven't come up with it. In fact, if you just coined it right there, you're going to be worth a lot of money. Nobody knows. After 1996, they're just...
It's the
there's
unknown.
no name for the generation yet.
Okay. So
What's that? The
have
boomlets. I like that.
I have heard Generation Z.
Everybody's writing like blogs and articles to try to be the person that name catches on. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
So did they mention at all what that generation, because I understand even that generation technically will be entering the workforce very, very soon.
Yep.
Yeah.
If it'll probably be like a bleed off of millennials and it'll be that same sort of fabric.
So the millennials right now, the tail end of it is 1996, so they're at voting age right now. So 28% of the population of the workforce are already millennials, and that's growing significantly faster than any other population as the boomers are leaving and as the traditionalists are leaving. So a lot of the millennials are in a place that says, how do we make sure that when folks that have been around, tenured professionals, leave the organization, if we don't have a good learning management system, how do we actually tap into and not lose? Because 80% of our productive capacity or 80% of the cost of most organizations, 100% of the productive capacity are the employees in the organization. So it's really critical for, as the millennials get in the organization, to be able to figure out how it is that they can engage with their more senior folks, and they're becoming managers as well. So you've got a millennial that's got a baby boomer and a traditionalist and a Gen Xer working for him. So in reverse, just like we try, or I try, I'll own myself, I try to figure out what's the best way to support and lead each of them. They've got to do the same. I don't know if that was that your question?
And I think you also have to consider job phase when you're, working, thinking about people of different ages, because when people are at different stages of their careers, they have different requirements, drives, and things like that. Like people's approach to life changes dramatically once they have children, for example. So, you always have to be thinking about career phase when you're differentiating groups of workers. And I would just like to reiterate a point. Like when I was talking about brains is brains is brains, I'm talking about like how we cognitively process information. So since like multitasking would relate to a cognitive operation. No generation does that better or worse than any other generation. But what Gus is talking about is sort of in a way more sociological, if you will, as opposed to more cognitive.
Life stage.
Or cognitive, which is what I was focusing on.
Okay, we've got time for just one or two more. Melissa?
Hi. Firstly, thank all three of you for bringing such a human perspective to this topic. I really love that, and it's an area of passion for me. It seems that we're still talking about a group of people, new people, different people, diversity entering traditional organizations, and maybe not talking enough, or maybe an opportunity for some of you to comment on a next generation of organizations themselves. We look at companies over 100 years old. There's increasingly few of them,
Right.
And to what extent, where we see young people as leaders of new styles of company, organizational structures like holacracy, which are giving people a chance to change the organizational structure themselves and using transparency and technology. So I'm wondering if there's any projections, maybe we can make this a closing, projection remark, but ways that we might see not just this diversity entering traditional organizations, but a next generation of companies themselves, and what that future might look like from your perspective.
I was going to start off by saying the PwC survey that I quoted, they actually divided organizations into like 3 different colors. I don't remember, I know it was like blue, green, or orange, or something to that effect. So blue were your more traditional organizations, what you're thinking about. I worked at Ford Motor Company. I mean, maybe it's evolved since I left, but it was a very traditional, large, bureaucratic organization, right? Then they had the other color, which was orange, which were your small organizations, your startups. And then the other one which was green, I believe the color was, and that was around your mission-driven organization and your purpose-driven organization. And they were saying that each individual will be attracted to different types of organizations, but those organizations exist. I don't know if the blue organizations, the more traditional ones, will shrink or go away. They didn't put any predictions around that. But my gut would tell me those 2 other ones are going to start to grow, and as people have less attachment to an organization, it's not so risky to say I'm going to work at a small startup company, and you see more and more individuals doing that. My nephew is 25, and when he left college, he said, I'm going to start my own business. Now, I would have never, my parents would have been like, first of all, I wouldn't have done it because I would have been too nervous and too risk averse to think about doing that at 25. But it's a different mindset. He's like, well, why not do it? Mark Zuckerberg did it. Other people have done it. Why can't I go ahead and start my own business? So I think you'll see some of those other organizations starting to grow and develop more as well.
Okay, Gus, just very quickly,
Yeah,
final comment.
quickly weigh in. So thanks for the question. And OD principles say that you always start with vision, and then you go to structure, and then you go to staffing. And as the visions of organizations are getting more explicit or more holistic or more meaningful, there's all sorts of different operating models that are popping up right now. And there's great examples across for-profit, not-for-profit, big, small, companies that have reinvented themselves, companies that have broken into parts. So it's almost the org structure falls out of what the stated vision is of the CEO and what they want to accomplish. And there's lots of different articles, and I can point in a lot of different directions as far as if your vision is this kind of company, here's ways that organizations can structure. The good news is we found that there's this transcendent set of leadership competencies that whether you're big, small, for-profit, not-for-profit, startup, traditional, that there's a set of overarching competencies that are more universal, that they're the same ones that will help you grow regardless of where you're at. You heard the adage, teach people to, or give people fish, feed them for a day, teach them to fish, feed them for a lifetime, teach them to learn, and you don't have to eat fish all the time. So this notion of learning agility is a competency that transcends all other competencies. But I'm happy to meet with you offline, too, to talk about some of the different
Thank you,
structures.
all three of you, very much. I want to commend you for not trying to offer unilateral solutions to governance issues or these other things. I think if there's anything I come away from this conversation with, it's both respect and excitement about the diversity of practices that we're going to see in the future, and the sense, as Gus ended with that Margaret Mead quote, that it's the small group that really ultimately matters. The big structures will take care of themselves in some way, shape, or form, but it's about how we work with each other and how we collaborate and how we build relationships that get things done. So again, join me in thanking them for their ideas.
Thank you.